The night the cattle stampeded through Devil's Canyon, Coulter Draven thought he was the strongest man in Wyoming. By morning, he lay broken in the dirt, fighting for every breath, and the only person who could save him was the very woman he once swore he would never touch. Coulter Draven stood 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders built from years of ranch work. At 28, he was known across Cedar Ridge as the most eligible bachelor in the territory. Women watched him when he rode into town. Men respected him. He had land, cattle, and a name that carried weight. That was why he had laughed when his parents first suggested he marry Mailen Dross. Mailen was short, plain, and 10 years older than most brides. She did not wear silk dresses or curl her hair. She did not giggle behind lace fans or flutter her lashes at men in saloons. She wore simple gray dresses and kept her brown hair pulled tight in a bun. She ran a small clinic from a cabin in Cedar Ridge and spent her days tending to broken bones and fevers. To Coulter, the idea was an insult. "How can a man like me," he had muttered to himself, "be tied to someone so ordinary when the world is full of sweet young women?" He did not know then that life has a way of humbling a proud man. It was September of 1883 when the storm hit Devil's Canyon. 300 longhorn cattle thundered through the darkness after a mountain lion's scream sent them into panic. The earth shook beneath their hooves, the air filled with dust and terror. Coulter had been checking the north fence line when the herd broke. His bay horse, Thunder, tried to turn, but one hoof slipped into a hidden prairie dog hole. In a blink, when horse and rider went down, Coulter felt himself thrown forward. Hooves pounded around him like war drums. Pain tore through his leg, his ribs, his shoulder. Then everything went black. When the sun rose over the Draven ranch, the men found him near the broken fence, barely breathing. His left leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood stained the earth beneath him. Old Jake Murphy, the ranch foreman, spat into the dust. "We got minutes, not hours," he said. "Doctor's in Cheyenne. 2 days' ride." "What about that nurse in Cedar Ridge?" young Tommy Connecade asked. "Mailen Dross. Folks say she's got healing hands." Jake frowned. "She ain't no doctor." "She's 8 miles away," Tommy shot back. "You want to explain to Mr. and Mrs. Draven why their boy died while we argued?" They loaded Coulter onto a makeshift stretcher and rode hard for Cedar Ridge. Mailen Dross was 38, unmarried, and living alone in a converted cabin she called a clinic. The town whispered about her. Too particular, too plain, too old to catch a man. But when death came knocking, nobody whispered. They prayed she would answer. For 2 days, Coulter drifted between life and darkness. Mailen worked without rest. She set his broken leg with steady hands. She bound his ribs. She stitched torn skin. She cleaned every wound with carbolic soap until the smell filled the cabin. When his parents arrived, fear heavy in their hearts, they expected to find their son dying in some dusty shack. Instead, they stepped into a room that sparkled. White muslin curtains fluttered in clean windows. As the floors shone, the air smelled of soap and fresh bread. Coulter lay propped against pillows, his face shaved, his hair combed. His leg was splinted straight and wrapped in bandages so white they almost glowed. Mailen stood beside him in a spotless gray dress, a small white napkin in her hand. "Your son will walk again," she said quietly. 3 ribs cracked, leg broken, but set clean. He lost blood, but he is strong. Hoy Draven stared at her in wonder. "Miss Dross, how can we repay you?" $5 for the setting," she replied. "3 for boarding. 50 cents a day for meals and medicine." She paused and glanced at Coulter. He's been no trouble. Coulter Draven watched the way Mailen adjusted Coulter's pillow with gentle care, the way she checked his temperature, the way she kept water within reach, and a thought formed in her heart. "Would you consider coming to our ranch?" Sorelda asked, "to care for Coulter until he is fully recovered?" Mailen's cheeks flushed. "For the right compensation," she said softly. $20 a month, room and board. It was settled. When Coulter woke enough to understand what was happening, his reaction was fierce. "Marry her?" He nearly choked. "Have you both lost your minds? She's older than dirt and plain as a fence post." "She saved your life," his father said firmly. "I'm grateful," Coulter snapped, "but gratitude ain't love." He turned his face to the wall, humiliation burning in his chest. He had been the pride of the territory. Now he was broken and dependent on a woman he had never even considered. Still, when Mailen packed her bag to travel with them to the Draven ranch, and he felt something stir inside him. Relief, perhaps, or curiosity. He pushed it down. The Draven ranch spread across 2,000 acres of Wyoming grassland. The house itself had seen better days. Dust coated every surface. Dirty dishes stacked in the sink. Cobwebs hung in corners. The place smelled of tobacco and neglect. Mailen stepped inside and surveyed the damage like a general preparing for battle. "Well," she murmured, pulling out her napkin, "we'll have this sorted soon enough." She settled Coulter into the main bedroom and began her work. Within hours, she had stripped the bed, boiled the linens, and remade it with crisp sheets. She opened every window to let the prairie wind sweep out stale air. She scrubbed floors on her hands and knees until they gleamed. "What are you doing?" Coulter demanded from his bed. "I'm cleaning," she answered simply. "Dirt breeds infection." "I didn't ask you to clean the whole house." "You didn't ask," she agreed. "I chose." Day after day, she transformed the ranch. She washed curtains, polished boots, mended shirts with tiny, neat stitches. She organized the kitchen with quiet precision. The ranch hands whispered in amazement. "She works like a steam engine," Tommy said one evening. "Never stops." Coulter watched with mixed feelings. His home no longer felt like a bachelor's wreck. It felt like something else, like a home. The scent of soap replaced stale tobacco. Sunlight reflected off polished wood. "You think this makes you indispensable?" he asked one afternoon, his voice sharp. She paused, broom in hand. "I think it makes me useful," she said calmly, and her calmness unsettled him more than anger would have. One day he complained about the cost of repairing his old plow. "Better to buy one strong plow than mend 3 cracked ones," she said, while changing his bandages. "Spend once, not thrice." He bristled. "I didn't ask for advice." "No," she replied gently, "but you got it anyway." Her words gnawed at him because they were true. As the days passed, he began to notice things about her, the steadiness of her hands, the quiet strength in her voice, the way she never sought praise. She was not trying to impress him. She was simply herself. October mornings grew colder. Each dawn she entered with warm water to help him wash. Her touch was practical, careful, without shame. One rainy morning, as she helped him sit up, her fingers brushed against his chest, and his body responded before he could stop it. The evidence of his desire was impossible to hide. She glanced down, then up at his face. Her cheeks turned pink, but she did not retreat. "Make sure your weapon's down, sir," she said softly, a hint of humor in her voice. The absurdity of it made him laugh, a real laugh that shook his ribs. "You're such a sweet poison," he said before he could stop himself. "I can't get enough of you." The words hung between them. Her hands stilled. "Sweet poison?" she asked. I don't know what you are to me, he admitted, only that you've turned my world upside down. She resumed washing him, her touch slower now. When their lips finally met, it was sudden and unplanned. Soft, warm, real. When they parted, both were breathless. This is complicated, she whispered. Everything worthwhile is, he replied. From that morning on, something shifted. There were stolen kisses, lingering touches, but there was also something deeper. Trust. She began offering counsel beyond medicine. Let your men take the strain, she advised one evening. Trust them. He tried it. Instead of barking orders, he listened. The ranch hands responded with loyalty and energy he had never seen before. How did you know? He asked her. Everyone responds better to trust than to orders, she said with a small smile. November winds howled across the prairie, but Coulter could walk now with a cane. He watched his men from the porch, impatience creeping back into his voice. Mailen noticed. Do you think your men are lazy? She asked gently. No. Stupid? Of course not. Then why treat them as if they are? Her words struck deep. That evening, he apologized. You're changing me, he said quietly. Change isn't easy, she replied. Nothing worthwhile is. Winter crept closer, and though the town had begun whispering about the spinster nurse living under Coulter Draven's roof, he found himself caring less each day. What he did not know was that those whispers were growing louder, and soon they would force him to choose between his pride and the woman he had begun to love. The whispers in Cedar Ridge did not stay whispers for long. They grew teeth. It happened on a cold December afternoon, when Coulter rode into town for supplies. Snow lined the streets in gray piles, and smoke curled from chimneys, as if the whole town were huddled close against winter. Jake Murphy was loading feed sacks into the wagon outside Kellerman's general store when Coulter heard his name. Shameful, if you ask me, came the sharp voice of Lorena Veilhart, the banker's wife. A woman her age living under a young man's roof, unmarried. She saved his life, Tress and Cade replied carefully. Saving a life don't mean you steal it, Lorena snapped. She's too old for him, too plain. And what children could she possibly give? Another woman joined in, eager as a crow over grain. I heard he was near engaged to Judge Morrison's daughter before the accident. Pretty girl. Good family. Now look at him, throwing it all away for a spinster nurse. Coulter stood still as stone. Each word landed like a hammer against his pride. Too old. Too plain. Too common. The cruel part was that those were the same words he had once used himself. He said nothing. He climbed into the wagon beside Jake and rode home in silence, the cold biting at his face, but not as sharp as the doubt creeping into his chest. When he stepped into the house, warmth wrapped around him. The scent of stew drifted from the kitchen. The floors shone. The curtains were clean. It felt like home. Mailen stood at the stove, stirring a pot, her brown hair escaping its bun in the heat. You're quiet, she said without turning. Just thinking. She glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. Bad thoughts, she said softly. Nothing that concerns you, he answered too quickly. He saw the slight flinch in her shoulders before she turned back to her cooking. That small movement filled him with guilt, but instead of softening him, it made him harder. After supper, she approached him with the bottle of liniment she used to rub into his leg on cold nights. You don't need to do that anymore, he said sharply. It still stiffens in the cold, she replied calmly. I said I don't need it. She stopped, the bottle held in her small hand. Of course, she said quietly. I'll clean the kitchen instead. Wait, he said suddenly. The anger that had been building all day spilled over. I heard them in town, talking about you, about us. She turned slowly. And what did they say? That you're too old, too plain, and that a man like me could do better. Her face did not crumble. She did not cry. And what did you tell them? She asked. He swallowed. Nothing. That single word was worse than all the rest. Silence filled the room. After a long moment, she nodded once. I see. She set the bottle down on the table. Then I suppose I should pack. Panic shot through him. Mailen, wait. You meant every word, she said gently. And perhaps they are right. She walked down the hallway with her quiet dignity, leaving him standing there with the taste of his own cruelty burning in his mouth. That night he did not sleep. He lay in sheets she had washed and pressed, listening to the soft sounds of her packing in the next room. Each rustle of fabric felt like something tearing inside him. He thought of her small hands setting his broken bones. Yet he thought of her laughter that morning when she called him out on his embarrassment. He thought of the way she had transformed not only his house, but him. By dawn, he knew one thing clearly. He did not care what the town thought. He cared that the thought of losing her felt like losing air. When he heard the front door creak open at first light, he bolted from bed, ignoring the ache in his leg. He reached her just as her hand touched the handle. Don't go, he said, his voice raw. She faced him, her eyes dry but distant. Coulter, pride is a heavy thing. I will not carry yours. You're my cure, he blurted. My counsel. You made me better. You make me better. Pretty words don't change facts. What facts? That I am older. That people will always whisper. Let them, he said fiercely. Let them choke on it. He stepped closer. I don't want some girl who turns heads. I want the woman who turned my house into a home. The woman who told me to trust my men. The woman who sees me when I'm foolish. Her grip on the bag loosened slightly. You're my sweet poison, he said softly. Not the kind that kills. The kind that wakes a man up. A tear slipped down her cheek. You're sure? She whispered. I have never been more sure of anything. The bag fell from her hand. When she stepped into his arms, it felt like something settling into place that had been restless for years. Winter passed slowly after that, but their bond grew stronger. The town continued to murmur, but Coulter no longer bent under it. He walked with only the slightest limp now. His strength had returned, but he found himself lingering close to the house, close to her. Spring came with melting snow and new grass pushing through frozen earth. The ranch thrived under his new management. He listened more, shouted less. The men worked harder than ever. One afternoon, a smooth-talking merchant from Denver arrived with polished saddles and gleaming tack. On credit, the man said smoothly. A rancher of your standing should look the part. Coulter felt the old pull of pride. The leather shone in the sun. Owning it would make a statement. Then he heard Mailen's voice in his mind. Buy cattle, not glitter. He smiled politely. I'll pass. Months later, they learned the merchant had sold poor goods at high prices and disappeared before complaints could catch him. And that evening, Coulter sat beside Mailen on the porch as the sun sank over the prairie in gold and crimson. You've made me wiser, he said. She raised an eyebrow. How so? I used to chase shine. Now I look for strength. He stood and knelt before her, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. Not flashy, not showy, solid. You've been my quiet fire, he said. Will you be my wife? She stared at him as if the world had shifted under her feet. But I am older, she whispered. Perhaps too old for children. You are exactly what I need, he said firmly. If we are blessed with children, good. If not, I still have more than I deserve. Tears filled her eyes. Yes, she said. The word felt like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. They were married that October in the small chapel in Cedar Ridge. Some came to witness, some came to judge. Mailen wore pale blue silk instead of white. Her hair fell softer around her face. She looked radiant. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Coulter kissed her with quiet certainty. The town expected their union to fade. Instead, it grew. And what came next would silence every whisper in Cedar Ridge. The town of Cedar Ridge waited for their marriage to fail. They waited for regret. They waited for whispers to turn into proof. Instead, spring brought something no one expected. A month after the wedding, Mailen stood in the kitchen with both hands pressed against the table, her breath shallow. The morning sun poured through the clean windows she had once scrubbed as a nurse. Coulter found her there. "What is it?" he asked, fear rising in his chest. She looked up at him slowly, her brown eyes wide with something close to disbelief. "I believe," she said softly, "we are going to have a child." The room went still. For a moment, Coulter only stared at her, the same woman the town had called too old, too plain, too late. He crossed the space between them in 2 steps and lifted her into his arms. "They said you could not," he murmured against her hair. "They say many things," she replied gently. The pregnancy moved forward, steady and strong. Mailen approached it like everything else in her life, with calm, careful attention. She read. She prepared. She rested when needed and worked when able. The town watched with growing shock. When their son was born the following summer, strong and loud and healthy, it felt like thunder rolling across the plains. They named him James, after her father. Coulter held the child in his large hands and felt something deeper than pride. He felt gratitude. 2 years later came Thomas, sharp-eyed and thoughtful. Then, when many believed it impossible, a daughter arrived. Sarah, born when Mailen was 42. Each child was proof that love is not bound by age or opinion. The whispers in town grew softer. The Draven ranch flourished in those years. Coulter no longer ruled with pride. He led with patience. The ranch hands stayed loyal. The cattle herds grew. The land prospered. Mailen worked beside him, and her wisdom woven into every decision. Spend once, not thrice, she would remind him when tempted by showy purchases. Buy cows, not frills. Speak soft, not harsh. Those simple sayings spread through the territory. Other ranchers began repeating them. Coulter would smile quietly, knowing the true source. He often thought back to the day he lay broken in Devil's Canyon. If thunder had not stumbled, if the mountain lion had not screamed, if pride had not nearly cost him everything, he would have missed the greatest blessing of his life. One evening on their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch while their children played in the yard. The sky burned gold and crimson, just as it had the night he proposed. "Do you ever regret it?" Coulter asked suddenly. "Regret what?" she replied, stitching one of James's torn shirts. "Marrying me, giving up your quiet life." She looked at him with the same steady gaze she had the first day she set his broken bones. "Coulter Draven," she said with gentle amusement, "you are still the most foolish man I know." He laughed. "Is that a yes or a no?" She leaned over and kissed him. "That is an I love you." Years passed. James grew into a respected rancher, known for fair deals and steady judgment. Thomas became a lawyer, sharp and honest, cutting through lies the way his mother once cut through fever and infection. Sarah became a teacher and later a writer. She carried her mother's calm strength into every classroom she entered. The Draven name became known not just for land or cattle, but for integrity. And at the heart of it stood a woman once dismissed as ordinary. Coulter never forgot the words he had spoken in anger, nor did he forget the morning he almost lost her to his own pride. One autumn evening, long after their children had grown, he found her standing at the fence line watching the sun sink over the prairie. Her hair now held streaks of silver. Fine lines marked her face, but to him, she had never looked more beautiful. He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You were never poison," he said softly. She smiled. "No, you were medicine," he replied. "The kind that tastes bitter at first because it burns pride out of a man." She laughed quietly. "You needed that medicine." "I did." He turned her gently toward him. "You saved my life twice," he said. "Once in Devil's Canyon, and once from myself." Her hand rested against his chest, right over his heart. "Ah, you saved yourself," she said. "You chose to see." He shook his head. "No, you taught me how." They stood together as the sky darkened. Coulter thought about the young man he had once been. Proud, blind, obsessed with appearance and approval. He thought about the night he had called her sweet poison. He understood now what he had meant without knowing it. She had seeped into every corner of his life, changed the way he thought, changed the way he spoke, changed the way he loved, not by force, but by quiet strength. When people in Cedar Ridge told their story around fires and supper tables, they no longer spoke of scandal. They spoke of transformation, of a proud cowboy brought low by a stampede, of a plain nurse with steady hands, of a love that grew not from charm or youth, but from respect. And if anyone ever asked Coulter Draven what the secret to his success had been, he would smile and say the same thing every time. "I sought beauty and found wisdom. I sought shine and found strength. I sought charm and found loyalty." Then he would glance at the woman beside him, still carrying that small white napkin in her hand, still steady as sunrise. "My sweetest poison," he would whisper, and she would squeeze his hand, knowing that what once sounded like danger had become the very thing that saved him. Because sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in ordinary paper, and sometimes the medicine a man needs most looks nothing like what he imagined. On the wide plains of Wyoming, under endless skies and restless winds, the story of Coulter and Mailen Dross lived on. Not as a tale of scandal, but as proof that real love does not shout. It works quietly. It endures. It transforms.